All right, YouTube, welcome back. Episode 3 in a series that's going to take you through how to completely build from scratch a website from a design agency's perspective. This has been professionally designed. It's all in Figma. We've got mock-ups, and we're going to translate it into NextJS, TypeScript, React, and then the backend is going to be powered by Payload CMS. It's going to show you as a new developer or as maybe a fairly experienced developer even, how a professional design agency would take a high quality set of comps for UI and translate them into a structurally sound, well-engineered React interface. And there's going to be a lot to go over. There's a lot to learn. If you've missed the first 2 episodes, I think you should go back and check them out. But the code for those first 2 is also available on GitHub. On the there will be a link in the description that it's got branches for every single episode. So if you're really mostly interested in the React side, just go ahead and go to GitHub and just check out episode 3 and you can start here. But otherwise, if you want to see what we did for the episode 1, we covered how to scaffold the CMS. So if you've never used the headless CMS before, or if you're interested in how to efficiently and effectively scaffold your data models, so that editors of the website have full control. You can build things with a layout builder perspective. You have all your different types of content scaffolded out. That's what we did in the first episode. And in the second episode, we went into the actual scaffolding of the React front end side. Not really from a visual perspective, but we went through and we installed all of our dependencies. We got the page templates that we need. We went and fetched the data from the CMS, and we took a quick pass at styling the base features of the website, like the baseline grid and typography, things like that. So a lot of good stuff has already happened in the first 2 episodes, but I'm really excited about this episode because we're going to start making things look nice. We're going to go through the header, we're going to go through the mega menu itself, and we're going to go through the footer. And this is going to kind of frame everything for the site, and we're going to build a lot of components that we're also going to use elsewhere. So like, for example, in the modal, the mega menu itself, there are going to be some CMS links that either need to link to like an internal page with the NextLink component, or they're going to link out to external URLs like social media and etc. So there's going to be a lot of good stuff. We're going to start to really make some progress on the front end. And if you ever wonder kind of like how to best architect your React app as a developer, some other frameworks like Angular pretty much impose everything on you. But the tricky part about React, and if you ask me, the beautiful part about React, is that it doesn't impose those constraints on you. So as a developer, you're like, well, how do I organize my project if React doesn't care? This is going to show you a lot about that. It's going to show you a nice, well-structured way to organize your components and how they're all going to work back and forth, and how to promote a high degree of UI reusability. And this is the stuff that I nerd out about. If you did skip those first 2, my name is James. I've been a designer and full stack developer for about 12 years, something like that. I don't know, but I started when I was stupid. So I've learned a lot. I have a lot to walk you through, but I'm also interested in hearing your opinions about how we scaffold our projects at Trouble, which is my design firm. Let's jump right in. Let's start with the header. Okay. So here's my terminal. I've got 2 of them opened up next to each other just in case, but I've got my code here and I've got the website here. So first thing we're going to do is we're in the folder here. We're going to yarn dev to fire up our Next.js server and also get Payload up and running. So we did use a boilerplate for how to combine Payload and Next.js into one server, which is super cool. It's basically you run one command and you get your headless CMS completely up and running, and you also get Next.js completely up and running on the same Express server. That is something that I don't think many other headless CMS can do, but it's super cool. So as you can see, we Payload booted up and then we got Next.js going. So if we go over to our browser, this is where we left off. It is beautiful. It's revolutionary. I hope that, we're almost done, right? We just have to put maybe a smiley face on here and call it a day. Nope. Actually, the website is going to look like this. So we have a good amount to do yet, but we're going to start to pick up the pace significantly at this point. So like I mentioned in the intro, we've got the header that we're going to look at, full fidelity. We've got the footer, full fidelity. and we've also got the mega menu itself, and we're going to make sure that we can link back and forth between pages. We're going to introduce some nice effects here that Figma might not be able to show that well, but when we get into code, we can make it happen. Like this thing right here, this little graphic. These little words are going to spin around and just kind of nicely animate there. And that same component is going to be used down in the footer as well, actually. So there's going to be some nice like cohesion there with the design. So we're going to build all of that today. Let's start with the header. So where we left off in the code, if I go back over and I open up our components folder and go to layout header, we scaffolded it out, but as you can see, there is not a whole lot going on just yet. So it's time to start making that happen. Now, the first thing that we want to do is probably pull in some little graphics. So we've got the payload logo here. We need to pull that in because we're going to want to use that. And wherever you can as a web developer, you should be using SVGs, or you should be using the smallest file size icons and everything like that that you can. Icon fonts nowadays, if you lived through 2015-ish, icon fonts, I don't think were ever a good idea. So what we're going to do is we're just going to build all of our like icons and graphics in just a folder, and we're going to make React components out of them. So let's say graphics, and let's say icon, and make a new TypeScript file. And it's just going to be a regular React component. So React, from React, const icon, type it as react.fc equals, and then we're going to return, let's make it an H1 for now. Hello. That is not an SVG, but it will be shortly. So I'm going to just pop over to my other screen here. I'm going to copy the payload icon out of the payload source code, actually. And this has already been set up. I don't think we need to really go through this, but here's an SVG. Here's kind of what it looks like normally in code. And you've got just a couple properties on SVGs that you really need in React, and that's usually you're going to want to set the width and the height, and then you're going to want to set your view box to match those widths and heights. And then you need this XMLNS. And then you just have the actual meat of the SVG, and in this case it's just two paths. So that's going to correspond to the small little triangle there and then the big triangle polygon thing. So this is the payload logo. If I just save it real quick and we try to go over to our header and import it, I'm going to use IntelliSense. You can just start typing a component's name, and then with TypeScript and VS Code, here, let me do that again. There's a little secret. So I'm going to open up, I'm going to say icon, and then IntelliSense is going to start telling me everything that I can import. And if I don't finish typing it and I hit enter, it will automatically import it for me. So that's a huge time saver. That's something that we should definitely all be doing. You don't need to write out these imports from scratch every time. Just automatically have your IDE do it for you. So boom, there's the logo. We got to change that to white though, don't we? All right, FFF 6, yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, now it's white. And what we want to do is probably just, because now you're not going to be able to see it in the browser, if we hop back over here, where did it go? It's white. Let's add a red background to it. And let's also make this, instead of a div, let's actually link it, because clicking on the logo, as everyone knows since the dawn of time, has taken you back to the home page. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a link. So let's say link, and we should be able to get it from NextJS. No? Nice. Don't know why, but import link from NextLink, and NextJS gives you that link right away. And all we need to do is say href equals / just to go back to the home page, and then we can say, let's say href equals, and whoops, and then let's say class name equals. We'll do that in a second, and then let's put our icon inside of that. So now, clicking on that icon will take you back to the home page. But in order to style this, we need to give it a class name, which means we also need to get our styles going with a, let's say, classes.logo. So save that, and we go over here. TypeScript is complaining because it doesn't have that yet, but it will. Icon, nope, logo. We're going to say background will be colors. Give me IntelliSense, boom, that red. And then we need some padding around it. So let's say base, should be able to auto import that as well. Yep. Nope. Let's say 0.875. How does that look? Boom. All right. Now I want this to remain a multiple of our base. So we might want to resize this SVG itself. So right now this is 25 pixels. And if you remember from the earlier series, I believe our baseline is, let's see, 20 pixels. So 25 is not one of those multiples. So if we go and add another class name to this, class name equals classes.icon, and then we say icon width, base, height, base, that's going to be setting it equal to 20 pixels on a rem value. But in order for that to work, we need to wire up icon with a class name. So let's go over here and let's say class name is a string. Nope. Let's do type props equals class name is optional, and we say string. And then we can say props here. So then React will know that class name is an optional property. And what we can do is say class name equals class name. And that will either be undefined or it will be a string. So going back over here, going back to our browser website, it's looking pretty small. Maybe we can do base 1.5 there for the height or for the size. Let's try it. And then we need to shrink down that logo itself. Yeah, so that's looking a little bit more proper. How big is this? 65. Okay. Set that to black. Okay, so now we should have, yep, 65 and 65. So what do we do? 0.75? Nice, 60, 60. That looks good. Is that how tall it should be in the mockup? 20, 40, 60. Nailed it. Okay, so we have a logo, and it's clickable. It'll take us to the home page. Okay, so now let's replace this button here. Let's say that in the mockup, I think it calls for a 3-line hamburger button. Yep. So it would be nice if we could animate these little lines and maybe turn them into an X like everyone has seen before. It's like it's not too hard to do, but it does include some CSS to do that. And I don't really think that belongs right in the header component. So we're probably going to abstract that out into its own little graphic that can handle its own active and default states. That way this header file doesn't get too complexified. But what we can do, because it's going to be a clickable element, for accessibility reasons, you should be using semantic HTML. So I'm going to say button, type equals button, and then we're going to say, let's give it a class name of classes.menu button. And then we're going to close it. And inside of here, let's just stub out a new component called hamburger. Like that. Now we need a class for menu button, otherwise this is going to yell at us. Nothing in it for now. And then we also want to stub out that hamburger button itself. So where should that go? Maybe we should just put that directly in the header folder because it's not really going to be reused. So I could put it in the graphics folder, but I'm going to put it in the header folder just because it's going to be specific to the header. So I'm going to say hamburger. We're going to make a new file, index.tss. TSX. Okay, const hamburger, React FC equals like that, and then say const active equals false, because it's going to need to be either active or inactive, and then we're going to return just like hello. I always go for the H1. I don't know why I do that. Then over here, auto import just by deleting a letter and then hitting enter. It's kind of a little shortcut. So I think that the header should really be responsible for setting and closing the hamburger button itself and the menu. So we should probably keep the state of if the hamburger is kind of like animated as default or as open. We should probably maintain that in the header because we also have to build that entire modal out. So for example, if we hop over here, you can see that icon there kind of turns into an X, and then the modal is open. So we have to scaffold out this modal, but we also have to maintain the state of that button somewhere. And I think we're going to do all of that right in the header, because the header is really what's responsible for all of that at the top level. So I'm just going to say, let's say const, well, what we're probably going to want to do is just scaffold out the modal itself, actually. So let's do that, and let's let that modal status be the state of the menu. So like I set up in the first episode, we have faceless UI modal, and all I have to do is say const modal equals use modal. Man, my IntelliSense is not working right today. Boom. Okay, and then with this modal package, you have a couple different things that are available to you just from this one hook. You can say current modal, and that's going to give you the name of the current modal that's active. And then you can get some helper functions like close and like toggle and open. And so we're going to grab toggle. And now we can say, hey, let's just write a comment for what we're trying to do. We're going to say, hey, if the current modal is equal to menu, then the menu is active. And the hamburger should render as an X. Otherwise, just render the regular hamburger icon. So let's say, what's our modal slug? Let's say const menu slug equals menu. Yeah. And then let's say const menu active equals current modal equals menu slug. So this is going to start to make a little bit more sense in a second. But now menu active will tell us if this hamburger should be active or inactive. And remember that hamburger is going to be responsible for animating itself. We're going to kind of consolidate all of that responsibility right into that component. So let's just say, let's give it a prop called active equals menu active. Okay. Save it. And let's go into our hamburger file and let's give it some props. So type props equals, I like to write props out above the component because that allows any developer coming in to just see at a glance what the props are for that component. And it promotes like a high readability and a high reusability. So I'm just going to say Boolean, and then we're going to destructure that prop active. And then there we go. Now we don't need to have that in here. But we are going to need some styles, so let's scaffold that out real quick. All right, I'm not going to lie, that took me a minute to scaffold out, and I never have a very easy time with hamburger buttons. Even though I've done it like 1,000 times, it always throws me for a loop. So to save you from infinite boredom, I just fast forwarded and did all the styling and the rest of the scaffolding, but I am going to walk you through what I did, and it's going to be better this way, trust me. So going to the header file, I had to make a couple adjustments here. So where we left off in the header file, we were storing the menu active state by using the modal itself to say if, hey, is this modal active? Okay, then yes, the hamburger should render as an X. But if it's not active, then just render it normally. But I added an onClick to this button here so that when this button is clicked, that's going to toggle that modal, and it's going to use this menu slug up here so that when you click this button, bam, that modal is going to be active as far as the modal is concerned. And so then the hamburger can then know to render active. And the other thing that I did was I also styled this button. So we have classes.menu button, and I'm passing in menu active to that button as well. So let's go back to the hamburger first. Now we're going to have active or not active. And you'll be able to see that these lines are going to animate differently based on the state of the button. So if I go over to the mockup, I'm going to show you actually kind of like in detail what's going on with this hamburger icon. Let me copy it and then let's just harvest it out over here. So there are 3 lines here, right? But there's actually 4 lines in the SVG. Let me zoom in even further here. There's actually 2 lines in the center. So there's 4 lines overall. This one is just going to animate away and up. This one is going to animate away and down. This one's just going to rotate like this, and then the other one behind it is going to rotate So here, let me do this. Paste. One's going to rotate this way, and one is going to rotate that way. And then boom, you've got an X. This is Figma. I don't know why their strokes don't always line up in the middle. That really annoys me, but that's a topic for another day. But anyway, so you can see kind of the animation tactic here. So we've got 4 SVG lines. The 2 on the outside are going to fade up and down. And then the 2 in the middle are just going to rotate opposite to make an X. And then we're going to be good. So if I go back over to the code, this is the first one. It's going to animate up and out. This is the last one. It's going to animate down and out. And then these 2 are just going to rotate. So if I show you the CSS over here, I'm going to pull this over next to this file if I can, VS Code. Thank you. All right, so hamburger, we've just got it sized. Line 1, we're setting this equal to an function. That's the word. Thank you. And we're using that active prop to either say, hey, is your opacity, if you're active, this is the first line, remember, so it should fade out. So if it is active, then set opacity to 0. Otherwise, don't set an opacity, just let it be 1. And we're going to translate, we're going to move it up -0.5 base if it's active. Line 2, like I said, that one's going to rotate. And line 3 is going to rotate the opposite way. And line 4 is going to fade out and move down by base 0.5. So it's nice and kind of like symmetrical here. But you can also see this generate line styles. I wrote that function because a lot of this stuff needed to be applied to every single line, and I didn't want to have to rewrite it. And I also needed to make a way that like generate line styles could be called, and then each different line could still have its own styles be passed in. So you can see I'm passing in the individual styles, and then I'm also adding my own styles. So that's pretty cool. Got the code for the hamburger here. We got the CSS here. If you have any questions about this, let me know in the comments and I can talk you through it more. That did take me a minute and I ended up cutting out all that from the video. But there's one more thing I want to show you before we hop over to the browser. I also styled this menu button itself because the hamburger is just the white SVG. If we go to the mockup, you can see the hamburger itself is just these lines. But we also have this container out here, kind of like we did for the header itself. Like there's the container for the red background and then the SVG inside. Same thing for this menu button on the outside. So what I did was I added or used this class name called menu button. And then we go in here, we look at the CSS for that. Pull it over here. The CSS, it looks kind of complex, but it's really not too bad. All we're doing here is we're using the prop menu active. We are saying background gray. Set it to transition, size it, center that SVG inside of it with flexbox, so display flex, align vertically center, justify content aligns horizontally center. Border radius is 100% so that we get a nice circle. We turn off the border, but here's a trick. We have a box shadow, and right now it's just 0. But when it's active, then we're going to be able to, wait. Oh, nope, here we go. So there is a box shadow. But when it's active, it's going to be a color of antique, and when it's not active, it's going to be a gray color. So this button isn't going to change sizes. The reason I did this is because if you have a border and then you want to animate like a 3-pixel border, that's actually going to resize the button itself. Borders add to the size of items or the box model. So if you use a box shadow, you can keep that menu button to be perfectly sized how you want it and still animate in and out a border. So I did a couple more things here, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like. I set up a stroke width variable that will be reusable. I added a sizes.ts, and this is just 3 pixels. It's going to be reusable for everything throughout the site. Whenever we have like a stroke, they should all be pretty similarly sized to be consistent from a design system perspective. And I made that file. I just stubbed it out. That's the first size. There will probably be more. And then I also imported a new package called Color, which is a JavaScript package. You can get it off of NPM. And what that allows you to do is it takes in a hex value, like a variable, and it allows you to run some functions against that hex value or RGB or any HSL, any color pattern. You can actually just, it's kind of like Sass, how you can do that in Sass, but this is the JavaScript way of doing it. So we use Color. Honestly, it's not my favorite, but it's the best that I've found so far. So if anybody has any recommendations there, please let me know. Anyway, popping back over to the browser, here you can see the menu button is styled. If I click it, it animates nicely and it gives you a different little border radius there. And if I can zoom in maybe, yeah, let's do that. Click it, you can see that it's a nice subtle animation. The top line fades out and up, the bottom line fades down and out, and the two middle lines just rotate. That's it. They were always visible. They were just sitting perfectly on top of each other so you couldn't see them. Now that's pretty nice. All right, so now that we have something that looks relatively similar to the mockups in terms of the header itself, we're going to start working on the mega menu itself. And the funny thing about that is that this is the first time we actually need to grab data from our headless CMS payload and render it on the page. So if you remember from the first episode, we have our database all set up. We have payload running in the same node process. So all I have to do is go to localhost 3000/admin and bam, here's payload. If you are joining us for the first time, I am one of the founders of Payload, and we built it because there is literally no other headless CMS that does what Payload can do. It's built from a developer's perspective. It gives you everything you need and nothing that you don't. And it's fully customizable, all in TypeScript. So, like for example, if I log in and we go to, let's say the global, let's go to the mega menu. You can swap out any of these components with your own React components if you want. Everything is completely editable. You get reusable authentication. You get internationalization out of the box so you can localize all of your content built in right away. Local file upload, and it's locally hosted as well. So it's not a third-party SaaS that you need to pay for. You just download it, install it with NPM, and put it wherever you want and do whatever you want with it. So it's extremely customizable, it's extremely developer friendly, and in my opinion, it is way more powerful than anything else out there on the market. This whole thing is going to hinge on Payload being able to build with layout building components and just really give the content editors a lot of flexibility and freedom to author highly dynamic content. This mega menu is just one of those things. This is relatively simple, but as you'll see further on when we get into layout blocks, Payload is really going to help us out in a big way. So we have our globals already scaffolded out. Here's the mega menu itself. This is already all set up from our first go around, but we have our approach, which links to a page called our approach. We have who we are, which links to who we are. We have studies, which is a custom URL that links to /studies. You'll see why shortly. And then we have a custom URL again that links to /contact. So what we need to do is fetch this data and then loop over it in our mega menu and then display it like this. So if we go back over to our code, we go to the header. Oh, let's actually back up one step. Let's go to the app and let's look at where we are actually fetching these globals. Because as you know, Payload is a headless CMS. So it opens up REST API, it opens up a GraphQL API, and it gives you a local node API. So if we wanted, right now we're fetching these, but we could just say payload.find global and grab it right from node. We don't even have to go to the HTTP layer. But we've already scaffolded this out, and it's kind of like this so that it shows you in a more often context how to use Payload. So what we're doing is we're fetching all three globals. And this is a really cool pattern for any developers that are maybe somewhat new to async await or get confused easily when you look at promises. What we're doing right here, we have an asynchronous get initial props for the app. And because all pages are going to need this global data, that's why it's called global. Every page has got the header, every page has got the mega menu. So in NextJS, you don't want to have to write that in every single page template. So we're writing it in the app get initial props. And right now, in our case, we have three different globals inside of Payload. We've got the mega menu, the footer, and the social media. And what we're doing here is we're saying await promise.all, and then we're giving it an array of promises. So each one of these fetches is also an asynchronous function that will return a promise. So what we're doing is we're saying fetch get from our server URL /API/global/mega menu. And then when that comes back, return the res.json, which is also a promise. So promise.all is going to run all three of these next to each other. If you didn't do that, you could also say await, fetch, and then await fetch, and then await fetch. But guess what's going to happen? Your code is going to wait for this one to come back, then it's going to wait for this one to come back, then wait, then return. And if you run them in parallel like this, your development experience is going to be a lot faster and a lot more rewarding. Because this is ultimately going to be rendered out as a static site anyways, it doesn't really matter, but this is going to just keep your development environment up and running fast, and it's just a cool pattern to know about as a developer, as a JavaScript developer. We're just running them in parallel, so they'll all fire at the same time, they'll all come back when they will. When we have all three of them, boom, we're good to go. It's super cool. But let's go look at what the REST API looks like. If we just pop over and we go to localhost 3000 /API/globals/mega menu. Bam, there's our JSON, just like that. How fast did that load? Let's see, just for the sport of it. Let's go here and let's see. I mean, we're local, but it's pretty fast. Wait, this is actually could be faster because I have my little JSON viewer. If I go here, wait a second. Whoa, I'm in incognito and this thing still worked. I thought it would disable my plugins. This thing slows it down a little bit, but the REST API is super fast, so you'll have to believe me on that. Anyway, going back over here, we have these three different sets of data already. And if I scroll up to our app, I've got them from app props, which comes in as the NextJS props argument for your app component. And what we're going to do is we're going to thread them through to the header. So the header is receiving the mega menu and it's receiving the social media because that's where it's going to need to be rendered. So going into the header, you can see, where's props? We've got all this set up already. Whoops. Give me a second here. We've got our props set up so that mega menu is typed as the mega menu type, social media is typed as the social media type, and those things come from globals. So when we scaffolded this out, we already set up our types. So our header knows exactly what types we have available to us. And that's a really clean TypeScript pattern. So for example, if I go over to our globals folder and we go to mega menu, here's where we define our payload config. And then here's where we define the type, and we just export both of them. So everywhere, wherever you're using this mega menu, you can get access to this type, and you can just change it in one place, and it's going to be beautiful. But here, I can go mega menu, and then I can go social media. Yep, boom, IntelliSense gives it to me automatically. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start to scaffold out the mega menu itself. So looking at the mockup, we've got a grid and a grid container. If you remember from episode 2, we did build out a reusable utility called grid container, and that's going to give us the centered max width for the grid, and it's going to be able to just allow us to more quickly keep everything consistent throughout the whole app. So we're going to want to use the grid container inside of this modal. We're going to want to use the CSS grid, and then we're going to want to do, let's say, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 columns, or maybe we'll do 8 and then just give one as a spacer, and then we do 3 for the social media. So let's go scaffold that out real quick. Let's say the first thing we need to do is actually render a modal, and this is something that we haven't looked at yet, but this is from Faceless UI modal, and I just auto imported it. And when you render a modal with Faceless UI, all you need to do, you can put it wherever you want, but all you need to do is just render the modal component and give it a slug. So we've already got our slug up there. It's called menu slug. And let's just give it an H1 and test. I don't know why H1 is my go-to. But back over here, click it. Oh, I know why. Because we didn't render our modal container. Yep. Okay, so back over in the one thing we forgot to do is we forgot to say, hey, modal, where should you render? So we need to actually add that probably down at the bottom of our app, just modal container. Yep, bam. And now this is where the modals will actually get portaled into in React. So the modal itself is not going to render inside of the header. The modal package will automatically take it from here and put it directly underneath all of our content for us. So now if I go over here, click it, there we go, test, beautiful. Looks like garbage. I love it. So back to what we were originally trying to do. Let's start building out the structure for this modal. We're probably going to want to give this a class name as well so we can target it. So let's say class name equals classes.menu. And then get rid of this stupid h1, and we're going to give ourselves a grid container, remember. And that's going to set us up for that max width that we talked about. Close it. How come it didn't auto import that? There we go. Now we need a grid. So that's coming from the Faceless UI grid package, which is super cool. And then we will render a cell, and we're going to say cols equals, what did we say, 8? And then here is where we're going to map over the mega menu itself. Okay. h3 key equals I. And then let's say link dot what? Label. TypeScript is really helping us out here. Ooh, you know what else we should do? We should give this HTML element equals nav. So the Faceless UI grid allows you to specify what HTML element your cells and your grid will be rendering as. And in this case, we want the cell to render as a nav element to make sure that our HTML is semantic. So if I go over to the browser and I go here, let's go like that. Boom, we've got our links. And they're not clickable yet. They don't go anywhere, but the content is clearly coming from the API. And so if we went over there and we changed that content in the CMS, you would see it change here, which is pretty cool. So from there, what we're going to need to do is probably start styling this so that it doesn't look like garbage. But before we do that, I'm going to continue on. We're going to do another cell for the social media. And then we're going to, instead of mapping over the mega menu, we're going to map over the social media. Dot links, and again we're going to do the optional chaining dot map, and then we're going to say, what do we have, URL and label here, right? Let's check. Social media, yep, links, URL, and label. Okay, why is it yelling? I don't know. Let's pretend that it's not and then see if it goes away on its own. It did. Holy shit. All right, so now we're going to return, and then we're going to just say label for now. So we should have, what do I got? Oh, I need to wrap that in a fragment. Or we should just, this is just going to be an anchor because it's always going to be an absolute URL. So we can just say class name equals classes dot secondary nav item, let's say. And then we also need an href equals the URL, and then target equals blank to open in a new tab, and then we do rel equals no opener, no referrer. Cool. Whoop. Move that. Cool. I believe that should be it. Go here. Got it. Not exactly right, but we're close. What should this cell be? Cols equals 3. There we go. That's looking better. So these will need some styling of their own, but we'll get there. So yeah, the next thing, I think if we go back to this mockup, these are sized specifically. I think it matches this, 2432, large body. And we don't have a component for that yet. So we should probably make a component for like a large body, like just in one place that we can reuse. Because it's not a paragraph, it's not a heading, it's a large body typography component. So if I make a new folder called type, and then I make a new folder here called large body index.tsx, import React from React. I'm going to fast forward because I don't think this is necessary. All right, so got the large body type component all set up, and it takes a class name and it will automatically join it with the base class name from the component, and then just simply render out children. So like you can render an H1, you can render a paragraph, whatever. Now we can also render large body just as if it was a typography component. So there you go. I did stub out a type declaration in the type CSS file for large body as well. And what that does, now we're just going to be importing it in the React component. So there's like levels of organization here. There's the base CSS for whenever we need to use that elsewhere. But for cases where we want to just render out a component and have it be perfect, we have this going on as well. So that's pretty cool. Now it's time to actually make these main nav links turn into actual links. And this is going to be an interesting part of this video because there's going to be a lot of places throughout this app that will reference links from the CMS. And if you remember back to the earlier episodes, let's see if I can find it. Fields link. We have this link field group, and this link field group has its own type where you can actually specify a page or a custom link, and then you give it a label, a page, and the URL. And this is used all over the place. So for example, if I go back over to the web browser and I go to Payload, our Payload configs use links in very many places. You have it here in the footer. You have it on individual layout building blocks. So if I kind of drill in and I look for maybe one of these blocks has a link, let's see. One of them does. Maybe the call to action. CTA grid. Yeah, like a link here. They're all over the place. And it would be nice if we could build one React component to map one-to-one every time you ever see a link come from the CMS. So you're not willy-nilly just saying, hey, where should this thing link to? No, you import the group of the fields called link every time in your CMS scaffolding. And you know it's always the same. And so if we can make a React component that fits one-to-one with this link, then we're going to be in business. So that's what I want to do now. We're going to use this most of the time in place of the actual NextJS link because ideally this is going to be more of a structured approach and it's going to be mapped one-to-one exactly to what we want it to be. So let's create right here components. Let's just say link index.tsx. All right, so basically what we're doing here is we imported the link type from the actual link field group, and we just added a class name. But from there, all we're going to do is say, hey, is this a type of page? Okay, then render the Next.js link. Or if it's a relative URL, then we know it's going to be rendered, pointed somewhere at our app. So if it's not maybe a page, maybe it's a case study or similar. So if the first character is a slash, then we know it's a relative URL. So in that case, we're going to render the Next.js link. And we're going to set it up appropriately so that if the type is page, then take the page.slug. Otherwise, just send it to the URL. And down here, we just have a regular anchor link. But we can now use this. If we go over here and we type in link, and we can import it. And then we just spread link. But I'm pretty sure this needs to be next link. Because the logo link is just the regular old link, but this one needs to be our special link. So that's going to be the convention we're going to go. If we have, oh, that's not good. There we go. If we're going to use the next link because it's going to be less likely, we're going to call it next link. But if we're going to be using our link, we'll just call it link. So there we go. So now if I go back over here, these should all be links. Yep. Console is yelling at me because I don't have a key, so we got to do that. There we go. Okay. And yeah. So now I think everything is wired up. These are linked. Oh, let's get rid of that top margin on that first H3. What is that? H3, yeah, top margin. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say style equals margin top, I equals 0, 0, or undefined. That should disable that top margin on the first one. Perfect. All right, so let's style this. I'm going to jump ahead and just blast it out, and then I will sync back up afterwards and walk you through what I did. Okay, so I just blasted through some CSS. CSS is, I think I've said this, it's my least favorite part of web development. I really enjoy JavaScript. I really enjoy the logic, but CSS is kind of like, if you do it for 10 years, it gets old, and I wish there was a better way to do it. But anyway, so that's why I skipped forward. I'm still going to take you through what I did, like I said. So we have a primary nav item for the link itself, for the mega menu itself. And then we have a secondary nav item for the large body link for the social media. And then we have a menu class on the top level modal itself. So if I go over here and I show you exactly what that translated to, the menu has a background of color gray. It's got padding, which I actually did something interesting. I took the header itself and I did position fixed. And now the header itself is going to be fixed above everything at all times. But the problem with that becomes, oh, hey, wait, I need to know exactly how tall that header is so that I can add the padding for that header everywhere else. And luckily, because we have a pretty rigid header design system, we know exactly the header height is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 base. So all I have to do, I go over to my sizes in my CSS folder, and I just defined a reusable header height equals base 7. And so now we can use that wherever we need, and we can add that padding to watch out for the header. So I just fixed the header. I set it so that it's above the modal at all times. And then I go down here, and the menu itself, I've got padding top header. So that's going to make sure that nothing ever interrupts the header space. Set it equal full width, full height, turn off overflow, and then I shrink up that padding just a little bit on mobile. Nav links, I've just quickly went through and given a quick pass to the styles. One thing, I have pointer events none and all. Now what that's going to do is, because the header is fixed up at the top, we should turn pointer events off, meaning that it's not going to hide any clickable element, because the header is translucent, right? So when things scroll behind it like this, maybe this was a link, you might still want to click on that link. So you should be able to click through the header, but then everything inside of the header, you need to turn pointer events back on so that you can actually click the anchor links inside of the header itself. So that's what I did there. Moving on, that's why this is here, and A, pointer events all, boom, done. Primary nav item, we colored them antique. On hover, we colored them blue. Secondary nav item, they're all white. On hover, we color them blue as well. And we also added transitions. So transitions I've put in a single spot in the CSS folder, just like everything else is just a set of variables. And all this is going to be just a collection of baseline transition values that we can use. Now the last thing, if I go over to the app.tsx, the modal provider package actually allows you to animate your modal windows as they come in and out, but you just do whatever you want with CSS. So what I did was I gave it a class prefix called Payload. It's a payload project, whatever. And what this is going to do is the modal package is actually going to set up BEM classes for us, block element modifier classes. And that way we can target these things with CSS of our own and style the modal windows and give them a transition time. So what that did, if I pop over to the app.ts in the CSS folder, I just specified a couple base styles. So by default, modal items have 0 opacity, but they have transitions for opacity. When you enter, the transition will be set to 1 opacity, and when it's done, it will stay 1 opacity. So if I pop over to my browser and I show you what that looks like, click on this, fades in nicely, click on it out, and it goes away nicely. Really nice. That's it. Okay, now for the first little bit of real fanciness that we're going to work through, let's build this let's talk call to action. And what this is going to be, I'm going to try to break it down mentally before we start building, and then I'll kind of try to fast forward through the boring parts again, but I want to talk theoretically about what we're going to do here. So if I'm looking at this, it's kind of like, as you can see, it's not perfectly lined up to the grid, and it's got to be kind of bottom positioned. So I think we're going to do a position absolute with this let's talk call to action. And when I hover over it, it would be nice if this arrow kind of went upwards a little bit or something. And then this background SVG should just always be kind of slowly spinning, so that, like, if I show you there's consult with us, get some advice, just chat, start a project. So we're going to position this thing absolute. The whole thing is going to be clickable to the contact page and it should have some nice hover effects. And we have to be mindful of the fact that this is going to be highly reusable. We have to also render it in the footer, and then maybe someday in the future we're going to have some nice like inline call to action that they can add into the site itself that might also use that. So let's try to make a new component. Let's call it Let's Talk, and we're going to import this SVG. We're going to make the link, and then we're going to position it absolutely in the menu first. So let's go back up here. I've already got the SVG rendered out, so all we need to do is go here and create a Let's Talk component. I'm going to fast forward and just get this scaffolded out quick. All right, so everything is all scaffolded out. It's super nice. I'm going to show you first, and then I'm going to go through and see what we all did. But if I open up the menu, you can see this thing down here is nice and position absolute down in the corner. And when I hover it, it kind of brightens up, the arrow moves. You can see that the SVG in the background kind of glows a little bit, and the whole thing is a link to the contact page. Super cool. So how did we do it? First thing, we need to maintain the state of if the Let's Talk component itself is hovered or not. So this component is going to maintain its own state, and we're going to pass that is hovered right through to the use styles React.js. So we can use that as a variable to show and to set CSS appropriately. One thing that I did here, and I don't know if I've talked through this or not, at Trouble we use this a lot as like a convention, like an easy way to join class names, and it's really concise and I like it a lot. But what it is if you have class names and you're not sure if some of them are real or not, you want to filter them out so you only take the ones that are truthy. So if class name is an optional string and it doesn't get passed in, then you can filter it out and then join these classes by an empty string. What that will do is it'll create a nice, everybody knows the CSS class names have to be separated by a space, but you can't just pass an array into class name. You need to actually filter, remove any of them that are falsy, and then join by an empty string. That's just about as concise as we can get it. I would love if anybody else has a cleaner way to do that without using external packages, just something that's nice and simple. But this is pretty much what we normally do at Trouble. Just filter out the ones that are falsy and then join them with an empty string or the space. Then we have the SVG itself. This is exported. I mentioned that I already had that prepared. And then what we do here, we just give it a class name. And then we give each path its own class name. These are all the letters, like consult with us, start a project, etc. So there's a lot of them, but it was generated by Figma. Scroll all the way down. And then we have the link itself. And then on mouse enter, we set as hovered true. On mouse leave, set as hovered false. And then I created another graphic called arrow. And this time I gave the arrow a prop that takes the color and the class name. And then I just have the heading itself. So this arrow component, I want to stop there and I want to look at that really quickly because it's got some cool stuff. Like I said before with the icon, note here we did not let it take a specific color because right there we kind of figured that it will always be white. But with the arrow itself, this component's probably going to be more widely used, meaning that we're going to need to be able to give it specific colors. So what I did was I created a type. I put the type right in the CSS file because it makes sense to keep everything nice next to each other. And this type is reusable now. And no matter where we are, we can reuse this type to say, hey, if you're ever authoring an arrow component, boom, you get all your types and you know exactly what colors are available to you. So inside of the arrow CSS, we just set the path stroke to the color that was passed. And now this arrow component is nice and dynamic, and you can colorize it no matter where it is. And we're using it in this Let's Talk by passing it antique. So if I said white, why is that not giving me? I thought it would. There we go. So you get the autocomplete and you can see all the different colors that it supports. We want it to be antique. So we set up that arrow. We typed the color options. We have the Let's Talk component built out. And then if we go over to the header, all I'm doing is just rendering it here. And then the CSS for that is fairly straightforward. All it is position fixed, so it's always going to be fixed in the same spot. We're positioning it with right and bottom so that it kind of overlaps off the screen. And then for smaller screen sizes, we're going to adjust that position just slightly because we need to kind of make sure that it's in the proper spot all the time. And then for the CTA itself, we pass it the actual widths, so we're shrinking it down. And one thing that I really don't like about React JSS and CSS modules and any type of like CSS like this, I don't know if there's a way to avoid using the important keyword, because as you'll see in the future, we're overriding the styles that are built into that component. Because we have the base styles here, but it's actually a different size in the footer of the mockup, and we need to be able to override its default styles and specify how big we want it to be. So I am using the important keyword. I don't know if there's a better way to do that, but if anybody has any, because it matters on where you load these components. Like, is your header style going to be loaded first, and then the Let's Talk CTA style is going to be loaded second? Like those things with React JSS, just CSS in general, like the order of styles being loaded, that still matters, and that's super annoying, but I think I just fixed it by going important here. So at this point, I believe our menu is complete. All right, last thing for this video, the footer. So first, let's talk about strategy, and then we'll go through and we'll see if we need to scaffold anything additional out. But I believe this should be fairly straightforward. I'm going to skip through the CSS again, but we can get the structure all out and in place. And in a prior video, we already went through and we set up our layout. So I'm going to show you something really quickly. Our page template, the ... slug, this is the NextJS template. And here we have a template component. And the template component is what's actually responsible for rendering the footer. So if I go and I show you, close this up, go to Layout Template. Template is a very simple component, but I'm going to show you something really quickly in an abstract way. I'm just going to touch on this because we'll get back to it. But the reason we're rendering the footer here in the template, rather than just kind of how we did with the header, we put it right in app.tsx, that's very deliberate. And the reason that we did that was because we're going to eventually introduce page transitions. And the way that page transitions work, so let me show you something. Let's say you have a page and it's this tall, and you have your header here, and let's just put this to a little bit darker, and then we have the footer down here, and then all this in the middle is the actual page content itself. So when you transition for a page, you want to actually load in the other page behind it, and then kind of show and hide the pages as they both enter and exit. So if a page exits, then it's going to remove itself from the DOM, and all of a sudden the footer is going to blink all the way up top here if we rendered it in the app. And so you would actually see the footer kind of flash upwards for a minute and say hello, and you don't want that, right? And then when the new page loads, let's say it's a different height, let's say it's like this height, then the footer would go back down to here. But instead of that, what we're going to do is we're going to actually unmount the entire this every time, so that rather than seeing that footer blink up when the page unmounts, it's just going to look like that for a minute, and then it'll come back in with the next page template. So that's why we've rendered it in the template component itself. So our views are responsible for actually rendering that. And inside of the footer itself, the footer will unmount and remount every time the page or the route changes. That'll avoid that kind of blinking that we're talking about. So I know that because I've struggled with that many times. There's probably a couple different ways to do it, but this is the way that I like that we've found in the past. Because once we get to that point, it's going to be a big hairy mess. Page transitions are still not a very easy thing in web development. So we're going to try to keep it as simple as possible. That is one of those steps. So now let's look at this. So we know we have content that's lined up to the grid. Just like we did in the menu, we're going to absolutely position this Let's Talk call to action. But look at this background color. This is actually really tricky. You might not think so because it looks simple, but if I was to hijack this, let's bring it down here and what? Am I at the bottom of the artboard? Wow. All right. So if I didn't have this background color, let me detach so I can go crazy here. Let's see. If I did not have the background color, It's my first day working in Figma, so give me a minute. Oh. Okay. If I didn't have the background color, everything would be lined up to the grid appropriately, right? So we kind of don't want the background color to influence, like we could wrap this in a div, yeah, and it would be like, yeah, we could put all of our content inside of a gray background, but then the grid container would be offset because this is not supposed to span 100% of the width. So this is very abstract, but I think we need to set ourselves up for a success here because our content needs to be in a grid container just like everything else. And that needs to be the same width as the full screen. So what we're probably going to do is we're going to set up a typical grid container. We're going to put all of our content in that grid container just like normal. And we're going to say just, hey, render this. But then the background color itself, we're going to position absolute and we're going to put it behind the content so that we can fake this gutter. Because as you see, a lot of these components have this same gutter going on. Like it would be nice if we had one component that would just be responsible for rendering this space and taking the gutter into account for all components. So we can maybe make another reusable layout component for the gutter. We can use it for the footer, but I don't want it to impact this grid. So let's go over here and let's just stub out a quick gutter component. And I'm going to put it in the layout because it's kind of like a layout utility. This is going to be the first thing that we need to do for the footer. Whenever you have like full width elements on pages and you still need to line things up to the grid, this is a common pattern that we use. You kind of you layer things so that, yeah, one of the items might not be positioning you or might not be interrupting your positioning, but you still need to have the content be positioned. You're going to see this in a lot of these layout blocks, but this gutter component, let's go over here, just scaffold it out. Whoop. Let's say props equals and then const gutter. We're going to have class name. Oh, I need an equals there. That's what it's yelling about. And we're going to need some styles. Okay. And then we're just going to return. And the thing about this is I think we're going to need to, like, what if we had like left and right and you could just set those equal to Boolean. So left, right, Boolean. So now we can say left. Let's set these equal to false by default. So you have to actually say gutter left and right when you render this. And then also we're going to have children because we're going to be able to wrap some things in here. So let's say div class name equals, let's do that same pattern where we have an array dot filter boolean dot join children, right? And then here, what do we need to do? Inside of this class name, first one's going to be class name. And then we say left and classes dot left, right, and classes dot right. And what this is going to do, export default gutter. What this is going to do is it's going to say, remember how this is filtering out any falsy values. So if left is true, then we output classes.left. But if right is true, we output classes.right. But if either of these are false, then it's just simply not going to get the class names. And this might make a little bit more sense in a second here. So hang with me. Okay. We say left, and then we say right. All right. Now, looking at this mock-up, this size might be kind of reused heavily throughout the whole app. Like it could be used for this padding here. Oh yeah, look at that, it is. Designers, look at that. So this size is going to be something that's pretty common. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to actually go and make a new style sheet for, oh, we have structure here. Let's just add some things here, like export const, let's say gutter, let's say equals, what do we want? Base, what was it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Okay, now we have this reusable gutter. So we can say padding left is gutter. And then right, padding right is gutter. Now this seems really trivial, but in the future it's going to get a lot nicer to use. So let's go back over here now. All it's going to do is just have padding. That's it. So in our footer, we're going to fake it. We're going to say, let's have two elements inside of here. Maybe footer itself can be positioned relative, but first we're going to have gutter. And then let's give it a class name of like BG wrap. Oh, classes.bg wrap. And then we're going to have a div class name equals classes.bg. So this is going to be our absolutely positioned background element. And then above that, we're going to have a div, or let's say a grid container, right? Because this is, we need a grid container, we need a grid, and then we need columns. So I'll say grid container, grid, cell. And how many cells do we have? 1, 2. Okay. So this is the first cell, and then this is the second cell. And this is going to be cols, let's say, what is it? Maybe 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. So both of these are going to be cols equals 6. And then in here, test, test. Okay, now we need to give ourselves these classes. So BG wrap, BG. And then if we think about this, the footer is going to have to be position relative, remember. And then the BG wrap is position absolute. And this is going to be top 0, right. Well. Hey, top right, bottom left, TRBL, look at that. And this is going to be Z index 1. And then BG is just going to be, well, we need to give it the background color, and then we need to set it to the height 100%. So first is height 100%, because the div will by default not have any height at all. So we need to just say, hey, fill up whatever space you have available. And we'll say background will be colors enter dot gray. Cool. I don't even know what this is going to look like right now. Probably nothing. Yep. And you want to know why? Because we need to bring our actual content above that background color. Right now it was covered up by that. So why don't we say like classes, oh, class name, classes.wrap. Can I not? Okay, we need to add a class name to our grid container. Filter, Boolean, join, like that. And then we need to give it a type. So type props, class name is optional string, and then we pipe it through here. So now this should stop yelling. Oh, it's still yelling because we don't have this over here. Let me pull this over. Relative Z index is 2. Let's see if that works. Test, you saw that right there. You can see that those are actually there now, which is good. Okay, now one thing we haven't done yet, we have to actually feed the footer and the social media globals through to the page component, through the template, and then to the footer finally. So if we go here, it looks to me like we've already got the footer and the social media going to the component. So all we need to do is just add them to the types up here. So we'll say footer, social media, or we can type them. Okay, yep, from footer. Did I get it? No, I need to say import type as footer type from globals footer. Okay, and we need the same thing for the social media. We're using our types. Okay, and now all we have to do is just thread those through here. So footer equals footer, and social media equals social media. And this is called prop drilling. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of that. Now, it's not necessarily like the only pattern that we could do here. We could also use context, and we could just render like a globals provider of context at the app level, and then any component anywhere could access the globals. That would probably be a better pattern if the app was more complex. But because this is pretty simple, we're just going to keep with the performance reasons and just keep it as simple as possible. So now we have to do the same thing and type the template. So we're going to say, just copy those imports and go up another folder, right? Or is it 2 folders more? Yep, 2 folders. Type props equals footer, footer type, and social media type. And then we can say footer, social media, and then we can say okay, now we just have to do that one more place in the footer itself. Okay. And now we have nice, highly reusable, nice pattern, performant, because all we're doing is passing props. Prop drilling is annoying, but it's also it's more performant than having context where it's not necessary. So now, because we have the footer data, we should be able to match our footer with the actual mockup. So what do we have here? Here's the actual footer nav, and then we have the social media down here. So I'm just going to skip forward and actually render this stuff out and maybe do a little bit of styling, and then I will get back with you in a minute. Okay, nailed it. So the first thing you're going to see in this footer is that I have a back to top callback that all it does is it's basically just going to scroll you to the top of the window. And if we go back to the mockup, you can see that's this little arrow. So when we click on that arrow, it'll scroll back to the top. So that's what that first callback is there. And then we go down, we had all of this. This is just the gutter with the background. Then we have the grid container itself. And if we have footer nav, we're going to map over it. We're going to put out a link, which is our CMS link that we built. So that's there's that reusability for you. It makes our job a lot easier. I'm starting to pick up the pace because we have all these components built. And from here on out, it's only going to get faster. We have all these things. Now it's just a matter of assembling them. And of course, we'll have more components to build as we go through the layout blocks, but we're starting to really pick up pace here. So then the next column, according to the mockup, is just some specific meta about the company, and you could fill in the address, you could fill in the email, the telephone number, all that stuff, and then we map through the social media links. Finally, we use JavaScript to get the current year, so we don't have to change that every year. Right now it'll output 2021, but automatically next year will output 2022. Beautiful. And then we have our CTA wrap, just like we did in the mobile. That's going to be position absolute. And then here's that button for the back to top button. So when you click it, it's going to run that callback. It's going to scroll the screen back to the top. And we're rendering that arrow that we made already. And we're going to use some CSS to rotate that arrow because it did point right, but now it's pointing up. So if I pop back over to the website, bam, we got the call to action. It's beautiful. It looks exactly like it does in the modal. We've got all these links. They hover blue when you are about to click them. And everything is already responsive because we're using the grid. So nice and easy. There it is. All right. that's enough for me today. I am tapped. That was a lot of development. It actually took maybe like 3 or 4 hours, but getting the header and the footer right are like a significant part of any like high-end website, and I think we did justice to that today. I know I skipped over a lot of the CSS, but trust me, I did you a favor on that. Feel free to go back and look at the code on GitHub, and feel free to also ask questions about anything that I did move quickly through. But it is a beautiful day outside in Michigan, and that is a rarity. So I'm going to go do some fun stuff. It's also Saturday, so it's my time to shine at this point. And the next 2 episodes, I'm also just as excited about. The next one, we're going to go into layout building blocks, and we're going to start building some parallax components. We're going to start using some media components from Payload. We're going to get really expressive, and we're going to design the heroes, and everything is really going to start to take shape. But now that we have the header and the footer in place, it's basically just going to be more of the same. So the pace will be quick from here on out, but it will be satisfying as well. And then the last thing that we're going to do in the next episode, or the two episodes from now, is we're going to wire up forms. We're going to wire up that contact page, and we're actually going to submit email requests, and we're going to build contact submissions into the CMS itself. So we're going to break those things out kind of like that. 2 more episodes to go, and then we're going to have a full website, and it's coming along really well. I hope you're learning. I hope you're enjoying it, and I hope you stick with us through the next 2 episodes. Also, I hope that you try Payload CMS, because I think you'll really like it. It should unlock a lot of developer experience potential for you and your workflow, and maybe even your team's workflow. But if you have any questions about Payload, feel free to reach out to us. We have that free license that you can just basically download Payload and run it for free forever, completely unrestricted. We don't lock out any features or anything like that. So if you're a solo developer and you kind of want to just kick the tires a little bit, you don't have to pay for it. You just download it and give it a shot. So I would appreciate if you like this video, take a look at Payload, and we'll talk to you soon.